Well, thank you everyone for having us. Today we're going to talk about how we deploy and test ephemeral environments at Atlassian by leveraging both Octopus deploy and testry. And it works quite nicely together and solves a problem that, frankly, many of us have had in the industry. And so I'm excited to share what we did to solve this problem, but then also share what some of the options are available to you today if you're trying to solve this problem also. So let's talk about, what is the challenge? And the challenge starts with the fact that teams used to build software like this. So to be fair, I started my career in software development over 20 years ago. And when I first started deploying software, we did what was called uh, cowboy coding, and would just copy the source code files out to the production server. And now we had a new version out in production. And one day I learned the hard way that I copied the files down from production to my local machine, wiped out a week or two worth of work, that having a deployment process was a good idea. So a bit of an embarrassing story from my past, but that was how I learned to really appreciate the importance of having a good, clean software development pipeline, complete with source control and tests and all that. So the industry's changed quite a bit over the years. But even quite recently, and you might even be doing this today, teams were building software like this. So it starts out with making your code changes on a particular branch. You probably run unit and integration tests on that branch, and probably run all of your unit and integration tests because they're nice and quick. And then if everything passes or anything you haven't ignored passes, then you merge to a development environment, which might deploy to automatically to a dev environment. And then every other week, you might go ahead and create a release branch. And the purpose of creating the release branch was so that you could deploy that to a QA environment. And then once deployed to the QA environment, then you would be able to run your automated tests again, targeting your QA environment. And you might be able to also have people manually test the code in that QA environment. So then you would run your end-to-end test, you would fix bugs, might take a day or two. Then you would run your end-to-end test again, fix more bugs, which might take another day or two. And on a 2-week cycle, at that point, it means it's time to release. You would have a go, no-go meeting. And with the go, no-go meeting, sorry, David's just asking a quick question here, trying to join us. So with the go, no-go meeting, then you might decide, okay, there are too many bugs or there aren't too many bugs. But typically in most organizations I worked for or worked with, you would get into that go, no-go meeting, and you would decide to just go ahead and ship it anyway based on whatever bugs were happening to be there. So obviously this isn't ideal for a number of reasons. But the biggest reason that it's not ideal was this challenge that we continued to run into. So how many of you, if I were presenting to a room, I'd ask you to raise your hands. I'm not sure I have a good way to do that with the live stream, but think about raising your hand here. You've encountered this problem. I've made a simple code change, and now dozens of unrelated tests are failing. As a developer, there's nothing more frustrating than that. You might even just be fixing a simple text change with the bugs, and you want to update the text on the website. It's a production hotfix, and you've got to run tests in order to do that. And you're running the tests, and clearly the failing tests have nothing to do with your code change. And so that's really frustrating. It erodes confidence. And it not only erodes confidence in the tests, but it also erodes confidence in the team that's responsible for that test. And eventually, if enough production issues leak out to the customers, it can erode confidence in the company itself within your customer base. So that's a very significant problem by and of itself. But you also have the challenge that this can lead to wasted developer time. And everyone wants to, they keep saying do more with less. How can we ship as much as we can possibly ship as fast as we can with the team of experts that we have? And so if you're wasting a lot of developer time, obviously that's a problem. So we don't want developers sitting around or testers reviewing failed tests only to find out that these tests are flaky and that they're not related to the code changes that we're trying to make. And then you also have the issue that it can mask real bugs. So if you just get used to all of your tests or percentage of your tests failing, then if you get used to that, then what ends up happening is eventually your team will start to ignore failing tests because they think that the failing tests have nothing to do with their code change. They just ignore them. And then they don't realize that it was an actual issue. Or another thing I've seen happen is you have a failing test and you're so used to ignoring that failing test that you don't realize if that test were passing, you would get further in the pipeline and find out that there's a newly introduced bug sitting behind that failure that you already expected. So it's really, really important to get your tests passing as quickly as possible. And so that's where the solution comes in. Hi, David. And the solution is to deploy and test your application before you merge the code. And the reason that that's so important is there's a bit of perception versus reality at play here. So the perception we all often hear is, unit and integration tests are good enough. I've heard that a lot. People like to rely on them. They are quick. They are reliable. But the reality is that end-to-end tests catch issues that unit and integration tests simply can't. Why? Well, the reason is that an end-to-end test is actually testing the full stack or the full pipeline. And so you can run into things like configuration issues, environment issues, integrations with third-party systems that just simply aren't executed by your unit tests. And so if you fail to run those end-to-end tests, you won't catch those issues until much later in the process. You also hear that end-to-end tests are too slow. Well, they are technically slower than unit tests, but one of the reasons that they're slower than unit tests is because they actually are testing more than what the unit tests are. So a unit test will mock some behavior of functionality, and the end-to-end test is actually using that real functionality. So of course it's slower. If you're making real API calls, you have to wait for those API calls to complete. But, and this is incredibly important, end-to-end tests aren't too slow to be valuable. So they are slower than unit tests, but they're not too slow to be valuable to your company. In fact, sometimes they're the most valuable tests that you have. They're the things that test your mission critical functionality that end-to-end flows your users count on. You also hear that end-to-end tests are unreliable. Well, this was definitely true when I started writing tests about 20 years ago, and I was one of the early adopters of Selenium. So if you go back and you look, that's about the time Selenium was first coming out. And I definitely ran into a challenge where the browser instruction was coming all the way from, I was in a data center in Virginia and using Sauce Labs at the time. They had just come out, and I think their data center was in California. And so here I am sending a message all the way from Virginia to California, which is across the United States, asking if I could click on a button. There was a lot that could go wrong in between. And so, of course, those tests initially were unreliable. But there are much better ways to run tests today. Our platform is one of them. And so end-to-end tests are not unreliable. And we'll have some really good evidence of that when David gets to share what his team has been working on and some of the amazing things that they've done here. And then we've also heard changing the framework will solve your problem. So, at first it was, well, we all need to move to Selenium. And then after we all moved to Selenium, it was, well, maybe we all need to move to Cypress. And now a lot of the people who moved to Cypress are saying, well, maybe I need to move to Playwright. If you implement the same tests in different frameworks, it's an expensive path to disappointment. So it might take you 6 months, a year, 2 years to migrate all of your tests over, but you need to investigate why those tests are flaky to begin with. And that's an entire presentation that I have that's outside of the scope of this. So if you're interested in knowing of the flaky reasons for flaky tests, I've got something like 14 really great root causes. Just reach out to me afterwards, and I'm happy to share those with you. And so it turns out the secret to doing effective trunk-based development is to run end-to-end tests before the merge. And so that means that merging code is, or the reason you need to do that is merging code is usually in most environments a commitment to release the feature. Maybe it's not fully baked, but if I merge it into the release branch or even into the development branch, you're queuing that work up for the next release. And that means I either need to fix what I put in there or I need to pull it out. But as soon as I put that code out there, other people on my team are going to start depending on that to base their code changes off of. And so that means in practice, running tests after the merge means your team is basing your changes off broken code. Since they didn't run the tests, they might not know it's broken code, but they are, right? And my personal take on this is that's not just rude. It also puts your release at risk if the broken code is hard to fix. And any of us who've been in painful go, no-go meetings have seen that. We've seen an overambitious feature hit the QA environment too soon. And everybody says, gosh, this would be so hard to unwind. It made a bunch of database changes. The schema is totally different. We can't easily back this out. We're just going to have to hold off on releasing. And the solution to that, and that's what gets us to this topic that we're discussing today and where Octopus Deploy and Testry work so wonderfully together, is with ephemeral environments. So ephemeral environments are short-lived environments that are dynamically provisioned so that you can deploy and test features before the merge. And the advantages of doing it this way are twofold, really. This gives you an opportunity for manual review and sign off before committing the functionality to the next release. So a product owner might have asked for X, Y, or Z, and now you've implemented what you think is X, Y, or Z. But with an ephemeral environment, you can say, well, here's where it's deployed. Why don't you go look at this before we commit to putting this in the next release? And you might do that back and forth multiple times throughout the day, get a really good result, and then you've decided to put it into the release. So that's pretty exciting. Your infrastructure can also be more representative of what's going to happen in production and potentially handle more parallel tests. As powerful as developer workstations are, they can't handle 200 or 500 or 1,000 parallel tests, but you can actually deploy to a testing grid and then have an ephemeral environment do that if it's representative of your infrastructure. You're also going to catch more issues that way because you have an environment that's closer to what your production environment looks like. And it reduces the variability, which anyone who's been around the Six Sigma world or any type of process improvements manufacturing knows that variability is the enemy of quality. And your local workstation is a source of variability. You might have a different operating system, different versions of browsers, and then you're challenged to say, well, it works on my machine, but I don't know why it keeps failing in CI/CD. And I'd also like to throw in that it's necessary, absolutely necessary when using AI to help with code, that you're also doing ephemeral environments. And the reason why is because we need to know, did AI actually build what we asked it to? Did AI introduce any new regression errors? Not only is the code clean, but does it functionally do what it's supposed to, look the way it's supposed to, before we go off sharing that code with the rest of the team? And if we don't, those same issues that might have crept in before where a developer changed the schema and now it's hard to back out, just imagine how much more difficult that is when it's not a developer who changed the schema, but AI who completely wiped out everything, changed all your database tables, renamed everything. So this is a really good safety net to be able to check what AI is doing before you merge. And then this is also really cool, is you can actually take the test results now from Testry and you can feed them back into AI to help inform AI how to fix the tests and how to fix the code in order to make the test better. And the ephemeral environment gives you a really nice playground to do that. So here were some of the considerations that David and his team had to work through. David, do you want to share a bit of what you needed to implement ephemeral environments at Atlassian?
Yeah. So, hey, my name is Dave Gimbalo. I'm a senior engineering manager at Atlassian. I've been working with Octopus and Testry for better part of 8 years, maybe 8.5. And so we've used them to deploy and test our environments for that whole time. Our product's called Jira Align, or recently remapping to Strategy Collection. There's my quick plug. So we automatically provision our infrastructure. We use today we're using Terraform. We use the same Terraform scripts to define the SaaS implementation for our production, our test, our staging, our sales environments. The Octopus and Testry are tightly integrated into our CI/CD process. We're constantly improving and maturing that environment, finding more issues, making it more and more realistic. And it gives us the ability to do more complex what-if testing, not just on software, but on environmental type changes. So we can change, you have DNS in here, but I could change the way I've configured my Cloudflare. I can change the way I've configured my load balancer. In our implementation, we're using IIS, which obviously most people using Octopus probably do. So we do the CNAME mapping in Cloudflare to the load balancer directly, and then the IIS picks that up afterwards. And we did a transition to every PR creates a website. Geez, how long ago was that, Chris? Like 3 years ago?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so it's pretty slick. So every PR creates a test environment. So we name the site that PR, so it's very obvious. So everybody knows exactly where to look. We've hooked that up to Sentry, so it finds exceptions. We execute the test code, so we have a multi-tier validation process. So it dumps out the system logs to our private Splunk and all sorts of other stuff. But it's really transformed the amount of parallel throughput our engineering teams can do. And I will say that we do the ephemerals, and then so we have two kind of classes of testing. I mean, two classes of delivery. We have essentially every 4 weeks we do an enterprise class release with the feature updates, but then we do daily releases for bug fixes or changes that don't really impact the user interface. So it allows us, this whole process allows us to run that test validation. And I have all the data, I think, later, but we could run through and release within an hour, even running all of the critical end-to-end tests. It's pretty slick.
Yeah, so I think the key part there is, in implementing the ephemeral environments, there are all these considerations that you have to do and a lot of work. And Octopus Deploy was really helpful, right, David, for being able to take what used to be various scripts that were laying around, deployment scripts that would sometimes fail halfway through the deployment, and then an engineer would have to come in at 3 in the morning and figure out where in this process did it fail, update the scripts, redeploy. And by setting everything up in Octopus Deploy, that deployment process was well defined in various steps that could be run by other members of the team and understood by other members of the team.
Yeah, so we were a startup at that time, so that other person was me. As a reminder.
Yeah, and then also, now that that's running on ephemeral environments, and since that's the topic here, having the same deployment process for your ephemeral environments means you're not only testing your code and you're not only making sure your tests run properly, you're also testing the steps in Octopus Deploy to make sure they're working correctly before that any changes to the deployment process go live. So it's a really cool opportunity to do that. And so, as David mentioned, the implementation is Octopus Deploy for deployments, Testry for testing. And the tenants, initially, the way we set it up, and this wasn't exactly popular, but it was a good way to transition from how deployments were working before to something a little closer to doing ephemeral environments. And that was having fixed branches for each tenant. So if somebody deployed to tenant / they were all superheroes, so tenant / Superman would get deployed to the Superman environment. Tenant tenant slash Deadpool will get deployed to the Deadpool environment. And then over time, we created runbooks for provisioning the tenants as well as doing maintenance to them. And then we're able to call the test tree step in Octopus deploy to kick off end-to-end tests targeting the tenant. And then over time, now that script is automatically called, and it happens to be a runbook. And so this is where Octopus deploy's new feature comes in, which is really nice. We just heard that it's a first-class citizen in the platform. Well, it is. If you go into your project now, you'll see it says ephemeral environments, and you can go in and set this up. And what this gives you the opportunity to do is when you define an ephemeral environment, you can say you want to base it on a parent environment. So that probably going to be your development environment, but it's up to you. And it automatically creates a release channel. In this case, I think the default name is ephemeral environments. And so if you kick off a release to ephemeral environments, it's going to deploy that release to an ephemeral environment. And then you say, well, when Dave and his team got all of this set up, they had to have runbooks created, and they were automatically running their runbooks whenever things got deployed. Well, what's nice now is that's built into Octopus deploy as well. So you have a provisioning runbook, which can set up the environment for the tenant, and then you have a deprovisioning runbook. And another nice piece of the functionality here is you also have the ability to set a default deprovisioning window. So Dave, I don't know if you ever got to the point where there were so many environments we didn't know what to do with, and we were wondering if they're all being used. That may or may not have happened, right? So this is a convenient way of saying, okay, we want to automatically deprovision inactive environments after 1 week if nobody's actually using them. So that's really nice. So step one, you can do that today. The next thing to do is to create a release any way you like. So you can do that through the Octopus portal, through the website. They have a very nice API. They have a very nice CLI. So the CLI is how we were able to do a lot of the implementation and for ephemeral environments before it actually existed in Octopus. You know, you could make a CLI call to create a tenant, for example. Probably going to get in trouble here. This is my bad. I put GitHub Actions without putting Bitbucket pipelines, I think because I got this from the Octopus website. But you can also do this through Bitbucket pipelines. Don't tell the folks back at Atlassian, Dave. And then step three is you can add test tree to your deployment steps. So we're actually available in the Octopus deploy library. There's a create test run, which gives you the ability to kick off a test run immediately, or you can just report a deployment. If you report a deployment, then in test tree, you're able to configure automatically kicking off test runs based on what's deployed in your environment. So let's say your tests live in one project, like a web project, but anytime the API is deployed, you want to automatically kick off your web tests. That's an easy way you can do that. Anytime Octopus deploys your API, now all of a sudden test tree is running your web tests to make sure that everything's working from an end-to-end perspective. And so in terms of how it works, now developers push a new feature branch and submit a PR. The ephemeral environment is automatically provisioned in Octopus deploy. That environment automatically gets registered with test tree. So we have a website. We also have an API and a command line interface. And so you have the ability to say test tree, create environment whenever Octopus deploy is creating the environment. And so that gives us a way to create the environment. The release is created and then pushed to the ephemeral environment. Test tree automatically runs the tests. And we now also support the ability to run different sets of tests depending on the environment, stage, or even code changes. And those tests don't necessarily have to live in the same repositories. They don't necessarily have to be implemented in the same testing frameworks. So we can do whatever kind of complex testing we need to do whenever we have whatever kind of complex deployments we have going on in Octopus deploy. So really cool and powerful. And so before we dive in and let Dave share some of the results that his team is able to achieve with Octopus Deploy working with Testry, I just want to ask a quick question here. Do you think it's realistic to expect 100% green test runs in your QA environment? And do you think it's reasonable to expect that with your end-to-end tests as well as tests that are written in Selenium? Well, I want Dave to be able to share the results here. Dave, how many times in the last 30 days did your team get 100% green test runs?
Yeah. That never happens. Yeah. Well, I think the green. So we have, I guess we have a couple of concepts. We have a pull request green build process, which is part of our SOC 2 compliance, which is the minimum validation, and that has to pass, right? So there's a final test pass, but if you look at this context we ran, and this is just our end-to-end test, right? We do other stuff as well, but this is, in the last 30 days for the release of our projects, almost 4 million tests, 95% pass rate, which is in practice is actually pretty darn good for that implementation and complexity of our solution. And effectively ran almost 12,000 hours of automation. However you want to define that as work savings, it's kind of par for the course nowadays, but it's pretty wild. It's provided a lot of security and risk. Like we recently completely decommissioned our release management group, right? So we used to have to do validation. Now we don't even meet. It's just completely automated. So for our zero downtime deployment, it's just an exception-based system. So, Octopus and Testry, and hardening that solution has made it a no-op, really. So we're pushing fixes to our customers. Our CSAT's been steadily improving.
Yeah, I think that's so important. I remember just how painful it can be when you have the change management meetings of, are we going to be ready for the release? What are we deploying? And then you have this other meeting that's a go, no go. And, before we started Testry, I was a director at QA for a startup, and every 2 weeks I was the person who was supposed to run the go, no go meeting. And, it was painful. Like, everybody works their butt off for 2 weeks, and some people are putting in incredibly long hours. And then somebody last minute throws in something that's untested, really hard to unwind. And now you're going into a go, no go meeting, and everybody's saying, well, you said we were ready to go for the last 12 days. And now you're telling me there's a blocker. Where'd this blocker come from? And why can't we just fix it today? And then you either decide to ship anyway, or you decide to cancel the release. And, it only takes 2 or 3 of those canceled releases in a row for everybody to just say, I have the wrong team in place. And that's a scary place to be as a release manager. And here Dave is saying, well, now that we're running tests before the merge in ephemeral environments, we don't even have to have that meeting. We only have that meeting if for some reason we don't have the test passing. And here, as you can see, the other thing about this slide that we should point out, this is across all environments. We also pulled the numbers for just the QA environments. So just in that final QA check, out of 356,000 tests that were run in 1 month, 99.6% of them were passing. So less than 0.5% failure rate. That's across 2,150 test runs in the QA environment, 750 hours of testing roughly. And then I love this because, I always thought, I was always on the fence, should we back off on, is 100% green unrealistic? In the QA environment, there were 1,892 test runs performed in the last month that were 100% green, which meant nobody had to review failed tests, right? And that to me is just super cool. And so Octopus Deploy, with working together with Testry, has really helped make that happen. You might be wondering how the FTE equivalent is accounted for. This is just, assuming that somebody works 80% of a 40-hour work week, what would that number of hours of equivalent testing be? And so that would be 6 people doing nothing but clicking on buttons for an entire month to account for the amount of testing that took place here.
So yeah, one simple clarification is this QA regression is the final test pass. The
Yeah.
prior one was all those other environments like we were talking about, the temporary ones for the PRs.
Yeah. Yeah. So even on PR environments, you have an incredibly high pass rate. And I think that's pretty cool. Because in a PR environment, and that was why we showed both, is in a PR environment, you do expect test failures, right? If you're making a code change and you're not running all of your tests locally, which isn't practical to do, when you run all of your tests for a PR, you do want some of the tests to fail, but you want it to only be the tests that are related to your change. And so that's really helping with being able to do that by deploying to environments.
Yeah, and let me just one other quick addition there. The reason we do so much of our testing in these environments is it's a complicated SaaS environment, right? So the SaaS solutions got Cloudflare, we've got App Dynamics, Penda, we've got other third-party integrations, our Clickstream, all of our monitoring solutions, and you can't test those locally. Like we can't create keys for every developer. That's not practical. Mm-hmm. So, if you have any type of mashup integration, which almost every site does, you have to do this kind of in situ site validation.
Yeah, and I would imagine so many of Octopus deploy customers are either enterprises themselves or companies like yours where the customers are enterprises themselves. And, in that environment, we've got customers that are running different systems on different versions of things that can't practically be deployed to a local developer workstation. That's kind of what you're getting at there.
Yeah, exactly.
And so in order to support enterprise, you really need to have that capability of complex deployments, which Octopus Deploy solves really well as complex testing, which I think Testry solves really well. And that just gives you the full picture of, is this release ready to ship before other people start depending on my code even, which is, that's ultimately how you get to passing tests. And then just to kind of recap some of the impact this has had, Dave, do you want to share, some of the impact of, well, we kind of touched on already, but.
Yeah, I think, man, there's just so many. This is what we do, right? So the release process of the software and the testing process is the critical last step. We've been doing dev productivity as a hot item, for a lot of development companies. They want to keep shrinking the time to test and the quality of the test. That's a hot, as an engineering manager, I have roughly 30 people. I got to keep them all happy and wanting to work. And the tools that they use are critical, right? So it's not just the time you save, it's you want to have the best people, because the dev teams go out to and chat with each other about whose environment's the best to work on, and this is such a critical element of it. And then I think I touched on it before about our quality and our ability to fix bugs, because bugs happen, right? I mean, there's always a bug. It used to take us, as we've matured, we've been constantly watching it, but in the last since March, it was January, I think we got the zero downtime releases, and that was mostly a function of our Windows implementation, not the tools, but we're turning around bugs same day or just in a few hours. So a customer submits it to our public website, jira.atlassian.com, and it gets immediately routed to the teams, and the teams know how to fix it, and then we trust the ZDD process and release process. And so we're only involved in exceptions to the process at this point. So we're releasing every day. We don't even have the go no go meeting. I set them all up, and then we eliminated them just a couple weeks ago. We completely eliminated the release management engineering process. And then now we're able to release around the clock around the world, right? We have data centers in APAC region, EMEA, UK, Ohio, all over the world. And we're able to release the riskier stuff at certain times, and then intentionally release the ZDD stuff in the middle of the day, so we get the most impact. And we did the blue-green deployments and stuff with Octopus as well, which is very, very cool. The list is too long, so maybe I'll just stop there.
Yeah, so I think that gives everybody an idea. So if you're curious about this new feature that Octopus just rolled out around ephemeral environments, or you've been trying to do something, similar. Know now that it's much easier to set up an Octopus, and it's really nice having that in its own feature, so that you can interact with your ephemeral environments, and it's not cluttering up tenants. Which I think I don't know for sure. You could ask some of the other folks on this call, but I'm pretty sure tenants were intended for different customers, multi-tenant deployments, not for multiple test environments. We just used it for that because it was convenient for solving this challenge. But now that we have ephemeral environments built in, we can just do that. So you can see all of your test environments in a separate section in the Octopus deploy portal. And yeah, if you're thinking about doing it, I'm happy to answer any questions about what we've done with Testry. I'm sure you can reach out to David as well. If you scan this QR code, I think it just takes you to my LinkedIn profile. I always love fielding questions from folks. So if you feel like something didn't get answered here today, go ahead and connect with me on LinkedIn. Let me know this is where we connected from and what you're interested in chatting about. But happy to help you set up Octopus deploy to run Testry tests in ephemeral environments so that you can see the same results David here shared with us today. And if you haven't had your first 100% green test run, I'm the guy to get you there. And if you haven't had your first 10,000, you can talk to me and David, and we can both help you get there. So
I'm loving the confidence. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
Awesome stuff. Thank you very much, David and Chris. Great story. I had some folks ping me on the Slack. They're like, this is amazing. Look at the numbers. This is great. If you guys want to read more about ephemeral environments, you'll find it up on our What's New page, which you'll find at octopus.com/what's new. You can click the link there, read more about it. We've done a webinar about it as well, etc. So if you're curious about that, you can check it out there. Chris and David, thank you very much for speaking at Shipped. We really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you for having us.